Good morning, everyone. Happy Wellness Wednesday. My name is Brian the Botanist, and today my special guest is Dr. Scott Fisher, who is a FDA clinical psychiatrist for depression and PTSD. Dr. Scott Fisher is doing groundbreaking research on psychedelics, on psilocybin, which is a medicinal and mushroom with their brain function, with their mood. We're going to talk about superfoods. We're going to talk about health. We're going to talk about mental health research. Dr. Scott Fisher. Hey, Dr. Scott.
Good morning.
Hey, how you doing today? Happy Wellness
I'm
Wednesday.
doing good. How are you?
Great. Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and all the research you're doing. I got to hang out with you at Miami Mushroom Fest last May, and your workshop there on education and science about the latest research into mushrooms and especially psilocybin and other psychedelics, which, you know, we go even broader than psychedelics, and we'll just say superfoods, plant medicine, natural plants, plant-based psychotherapy. And you presented, you know, your latest research, and it was really well received. There was a big audience, a lot of questions, great questions. I just remember so many people in that audience, the 30 to 50 people there underneath that big tent out at Gaia's Hideout, had so many great questions for you about future research you want to do and your passions and how this all got started. So I just wanted to catch up with you. It's been about 6 months and see how everything's going. So tell us, what have you been up to lately?
Yeah, well, first I wanted to say that was a great event, the Miami Mushroom Festival, and I look forward to when you guys throw that event again, because I had an amazing time there, and yeah, the audience participation in my talk was also very special. So, you know, the psychedelic topic is really just like growing so much in awareness, you know, right now compared to, say, 1 year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's just taking off, which I really love. And I also love all the different lenses and angles people come at with, you know, trying to understand and describe the psychedelic medicines. So, yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk about whatever really interests you and kind of the live ultimate, you know, audience. In terms of, you know, where I'm at with my work, I'm still involved in the USONA Institute study, which is a phase 2 FDA study assessing the effectiveness of a single dose of psilocybin for the treatment of major depressive disorder or depression.
Now,
so it's really
for that. Anyone in the public can participate? Or
so with a study like this, they have a lot of what are called criteria: inclusion to be included and exclusion criteria.
Okay.
For these studies, they really need to standardize a lot of different factors for it to make sense to the FDA and the scientific community.
Okay.
So that has some advantages of, you know, being able to understand and isolate different factors. It also has some disadvantages in terms of not always having as much real world applicability as we would like, because
qualified if they perhaps had other extenuating circumstances, health conditions, or other things going on in their life that would preclude them from being in the study.
Yeah. Health conditions or, you know, other sorts of mental health disorders aside from depression, other sorts of, you know, drug use sort of histories or problems. There's a really quite a long list, but you know, there's many people who qualify for it. And what's really cool, I think, about the USONA study is that it's for anyone with depression. It isn't just treatment-resistant depression. It isn't like you have to have had failed other sort of treatments or have had depression, you know, for so long. Many participants in the study have kind of they've had very little treatment history, or maybe didn't suffer from depression for forever, and so it's really it casts a wide net, which I really like, and
Cool.
And it may be this sort of study, if it continues to look, you know, positive, it may make it so that people can, you know, get a treatment early on when they're starting to be depressed and avoid chronic depression or lots of recurrences of depression, which in this era is really quite common, unfortunately.
So you mentioned it's a single dose of psilocybin. Now, is that done? Do you give them, like, do they do that at home? And then do they get instructions on how to do it in a safe way? Because I've heard that with a lot of studies, there's a lot of controls where you should have someone who is like, you know, going to be there to support you, who might not be taking the plant medicine or the fungi medicine.
Right. That's an awesome question. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of think about using psychedelic medicines. In this study, we employ a method called the psychedelic assisted therapy or psychedelic assisted psychotherapy model,
Okay.
which incorporates what many know as the set and setting sort of factors in taking a psychedelic. It's because it's a single dose and it's a single relatively large dose. It's not like a microdose. It's not something that people are meant to kind of feel. It's really meant to generate a powerful internal experience.
But I want someone to drive or to be out, you know.
Yeah, it would not be, it could really lead to unsafe things if done in an unmonitored sort of setting with people who aren't familiar with, you know.
That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means it needs to have controls, just like alcohol has controls. Alcohol obviously isn't really used for research, so it's not even a good analogy. But I heard a good example the other day that, like, with alcohol in our culture, there are controls and rituals. Like, most people know not to drink in the morning, not to drink by themselves, and not to drink and drive. Those are societal, you know, implied, you know, rituals / you know, best practices, you know, for, you know, being able to have balance and coping. So with psychedelics, how do you advise people to do this so that they can do it in a safe way?
Well, you know, so in this study, the hypothesis is we can maximize the safety and effectiveness of this treatment by using a preparation stage, a dosing stage, and an integration stage of the treatment.
Okay.
And so in the preparation stage, there's, you know, a few different objectives that we try to achieve. And, you know, the top one is just to kind of get to know each other. In this study, it's myself and a co-facilitator for each one participant. So
as a co-facilitator, another psychiatrist, or is it a friend?
It can be a wide range of sort of different backgrounds. In this case, my co-facilitator is Julia Muir, and she is a doctor, an MD.
So it's the same co-facilitator with every patient? So they work with two people from the USONA?
So this trial has 7 or 8 different sites across the country. At our site, she and I are doing all of the participants together, but that could vary, and the credentials of both the lead facilitator, which is myself, and the co-facilitator can also vary to a certain extent. But in the preparation stage, so sort of getting to know each other is like probably the number one, like developing the rapport, that comfort level, you know, the facilitators getting to know more about the participant. And just on the nomenclature a little bit here, facilitator is the word for kind of the therapist or the guide. There's different words, you know, people like to use. And the participant is the journeyer or the patient or the client, or however you kind of want to look at that. So, so we really get 8 hours of preparation time, which is a really nice amount of time to kind of get to know each other, get to understand what brought them to the trial, hear a lot about their lives.
Face to face.
Yeah, we're actually in the dosing room for the preparation session. And we usually do that on the typical has been to do that on a Friday, and then, you know, have the weekend, then dose on a Monday. So there's a lot of concentrated time, which I think has worked really nicely for a study like this and for a treatment like this. Other elements of the preparation include making sure we're educating the participant about, you know, the study, about psilocybin, and what it can do, how to navigate, you know, psychologically the trip, basically the journey, because there's sort of some hypotheses that if challenging material comes up, it's important to sort of not avoid that material, which is sort of the normal psychological reaction for most of us, to avoid painful or challenging sort of psychological experiences, but actually to delve into it and to explore it and to see what's happening there, which can often lead to breakthroughs and new understandings and new insights. So helping people kind of understand that. We do some sort of mindfulness and grounding, teach some techniques along those lines, because that can be helpful if people are feeling like a little bit too out there in the ether, or like,
Or
things along those lines.
you're
Sorry?
prepping people so that if they feel anxiety or they feel like they might have a challenging thing happen, they know how to cope, right?
Yeah, that they can, and hopefully cope, and hopefully use it therapeutically rather than, because it can be the case that some people with challenging sort of psychological and emotional experiences during a psychedelic session, you can feel traumatized afterwards if you really don't have the proper support, and you don't have a sense of how to navigate that difficult terrain. So I've heard quite commonly from people using psychedelics without, proper preparation and support and things along those lines, that afterwards it felt more harmful to them than helpful. So that may still be the case with all of the kind of things we're doing, that could happen. And that's another part of the study that we're doing, is to see if that might be a possibility. But we think we can really minimize those risks with these kind of protocols in place for our treatments.
So what kind of efficacy have you had with depression?
So in our study right now, we are more than halfway through, and hopefully we'll be completing within a few months.
Mm-hmm.
But at the present time, we haven't yet kind of unlocked the data to look at it. The way they do these studies is to control for any sort of biases.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of you collect all the data, but you kind of put it in a lockbox till the study is over or almost over,
okay,
before you really start to tabulate all the different results. And it's also what we call a double-blind, placebo-controlled, and people are randomized into either the large dose of psilocybin dose, or a dose of niacin, which is one of the vitamin Bs, which doesn't tend to cause too much psychologically or emotionally, but can cause physical reactions in the body.
So that's like the double-blind placebo. That's the placebo control, and they don't know if they're taking niacin or they're taking psilocybin. So that's the double-blind.
Yeah.
And then
Double-blind means they don't know, and we don't know.
That's a study. It sounds like that's the three big things, right? Randomized, placebo-controlled, and blind, double-blind.
Yeah, that's been kind of the gold standard for these sort of pharmaceutical studies in the modern age, in the last 30 to 40 years, to use those. Of course, we could go into a lot of depth about how useful that model is for psychedelic sort of treatments, because the goal is to, the sort of idea there is to not know what you have taken. But with psychedelic treatments, we think it's very important what the subjective effects of the experience are. It's not just this is doing something to your brain and you don't even know what's happening, although that's one way of looking at it and an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah. But what you experience during the trip, we think, is very meaningful and valuable for healing. So that's where it's sort of like,
you don't want blind. You don't want them to wonder if they're really feeling it or if they're on the placebo too, because you're explaining the study ahead of it to them, right? Like they could be getting the placebo. They know that, right?
And the healing is through the journey.
Yes.
And so, and niacin
journey. I love it. Yeah.
Sorry?
It's not just the chemical, it's the journey. I love that.
And niacin doesn't cause a journey necessarily, unless people just happen to have a journey, which you can sometimes just by lying, because in the dosing we have them lie on a couch, they listen to music, and they wear an eye mask to kind of help them kind of go inside and facilitate an internal inward experience. But yeah, there's a lot of questions about, the blinding and how effectively can you blind, and also how important is it to really blind effectively. So I won't belabor that point too much because it gets kind of technical. But the final parts of the preparation session are, intention setting is really a key factor. So we ask people to, come up with one or two sort of intentions, and it might be something very simple as to feel better, or feel less depressed, or feel happier. Or there's sometimes specific things to heal from some problem in their past, or to understand, some blockage that they're experiencing.
Wow, I love
So
preparation stage sounds really important. I mean, from education and mindfulness to setting intentions. And what was the first thing you said is the first part is the 8 hours of like getting to know each other? That's all.
yeah, just really like getting to know each other, get comfortable with each other, and get to understand, what is the participant in the study, what has been their life experience so far, as much as we can in that time.
Cool. Well, we're getting a couple questions, and I invite people to ask more. We've got some viewers on right now. This is also getting saved for IGTV, so many people can watch in the future. Someone just asked, can someone be on another medication and still participate in this type of treatment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in our studies and in most of these psychedelic studies, if you come to the trial on certain types of psychotropic or mental health medications, that's okay. But for many of them, we might ask for you to taper off of them in preparation for the dosing. Whether there's a possibility of interactions or decreasing the efficacy of the psilocybin treatment are a few concerns in that. Not all of them, so it kind of is on a case-by-case basis and depending on what you're taking, but we do taper many people off of their psychotropics in time for the dosing.
What about other types of drugs like a blood thinner?
Well, then you start to get more specific. Most sort of regular medical drugs are okay to be taken.
Yeah.
But there may be certain instances where there could be an interaction potentially, and we would ask for that would either be an exclusionary criteria or ask for someone to get an alternative medicine to treat whatever condition is being treated by the problematic drug for us.
Okay.
Yeah, something also a little bit interesting about that question is there's a different group called MAPS, so the Multi-Disciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies.
Rick, is it, what's the founder's name?
Rick Doblin is the founder of MAPS, and he that's another really interesting nonprofit, and the existence of nonprofits in this psychedelic research has been hugely instrumental for pushing this whole field forward, and I also think it's going to be hugely important for the continuance of providing these treatments with kind of an equitable and justice for everyone, rather than there's also a lot of for-profit psychedelic companies entering this sphere, and they're going to do some great work, but they're also going to get, I think, very much influenced by the nonprofits in this sector, which I think is just fantastic, and I'm really happy about that. But the MAP study, so they're doing MDMA-assisted therapy, and MDMA is like a psychedelic-like substance for post-traumatic stress disorder. And they did some kind of later sub-analyses of some of their trials where the treatments have been very effective, but they did find that people who had been taking like SSRI types of antidepressants and things like that, they had to be tapered off for their treatments. So they were all off of them by the time they got dosed with the MDMA. But those people didn't get quite as robust a response to the MDMA treatment as people who hadn't been taking the SSRI types of antidepressant medications. And so that's something that we're going to have to study more. It could be possible that giving those individuals higher doses of MDMA could still achieve the effect that we're looking for. But that is kind of just a thought I had regarding that question.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up a good point too, is that there are lots of frontiers of research in psychedelics right now involving more than just psilocybin, because mushrooms are booming right now. Mushroom science, mushroom health, mushroom interest, mushroom culture. As you know, and we had another event for Miami Mushroom Fest last weekend in Midtown, and had about 200 people come out, and we gave 3 weeks notice, and we got over 200 people that wanted to just come and dance, and vendors and artists, and but it's more, so it's really cool how mushrooms are really taking off, because I think the Chinese and Japanese and some Russians and Norwegian culture is known for a while that some of these mushrooms, and also I want to talk to you today about some of the medicinal ones that Live Ultimate has, and how your health personally and how other people you've talked to, how their health has been benefited by medicinal mushrooms, or by superfoods, or by living a non-toxic life, or by being more mindful in their health. Like, that's what we're all about at Live Ultimate, is reading our labels about purity, We don't put any sugar, any type of like preservatives. We use glass packaging. We use 100% pure superfoods, so no fillers, no cheap ingredients, no weird ingredients. Same thing with our skincare. Our ethics and our values are just really strong on our core, what we call our foundation of uncompromising standards in our products and in the people that are part of the brand, part of the community. And they're very interested in health, mental health and physical health and overall holistic health. So I think the research you're doing is really, really fascinating to a large community, not only in Miami, but around the world. But we live in Miami. I know you're working with the University of Miami, you told me. You've been in Broward, and I would love to learn a little bit more about, you know, how again you got into this field, because I learned a little bit at your speech in May, but I know that you're a newer psychiatrist and that you've recently graduated in the last 5 to 6 or 7 years, is it? And what university?
I've been practicing in South Florida now for 7.5 years.
Okay.
So I finished my training in 2014.
Okay, so actually not that new then, in the last 7 years.
Newish, but not brand new. Yeah.
What university did you go to?
Sorry?
What university did you get your degree from?
Okay, so I did med school in Chicago at Northwestern, where I also did my general psychiatry residency. I came down to Miami for a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship, and that's what I completed in 2014 before starting in private practice.
Wow.
And then in 2018, I did a certificate program in psychedelic therapy and research at an institute in San Francisco. That kind of led me to find this opportunity working on this Usoma Institute trial at a place called Siegel Clinical Trials that has multiple sites around South Florida and other states, but our site is in Lauderhill up here in Broward. Yeah.
Okay. So you're in Fort Lauderdale when you're doing the clinical research on depression?
Yeah, basically.
Okay. And this is an FDA-approved study?
Yep. It's a phase 2 study. If people are interested in you know, the study or wanting to refer friends, if you search for USONA, USONA Institute, and I can put some of that stuff on my IG later if people didn't get a chance to get it now. That will have the information on kind of how to screen for the study and possibly enroll. Okay.
Yeah, I remember you saying at Miami Mushroom Fest to the crowd that, you know, there are other studies going on, and there are opportunities if you do your research, you know, online. You can find universities that are doing research perhaps and apply to be on their list if you qualify and if this is a need of yours. Yeah,
well, and also our Siegel Clinical Trials, that site will probably be having a few more trials coming for psychedelic treatments for depression as well as for generalized anxiety.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you, with medicinal mushrooms and psilocybin, which I kind of still, you know, group into the medicinal mushrooms because it's a medicinal effect. If it's, I mean, mental health is medicine too, of course. And so I know psychedelics is also a good word, and it shouldn't be frowned upon. It does have a cultural connotation of, like, you know, recreational drug use or counterculture, which there's nothing wrong with counterculture, by the way. Recreational drug use, I would to be that.
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah, you know, it depends who you ask, exactly. But we talked about this at Miami Mushroom Fest, and it's clearly recognized in your industry and well respected, in that pharmaceutical companies now are looking into it. I know it's been legalized in several cities like Denver, I believe, and in Jamaica it's legal, and in other countries, and there are standardized amounts that are used in pharmaceutical settings in places like Jamaica. I know you can get like a nasal spray. Is psilocybin primarily used for depression, or are there other generalized mental health or physical health benefits? Like, what about anxiety? What about pain relief? What about trauma? What about schizophrenia? You know, my younger brother has schizophrenia, so, you know, this would be something I'd be curious about.
Yeah, well, there are many conditions that are being explored in terms of using psilocybin to treat those aside from depression. And actually, many of those you mentioned are being explored. Schizophrenia, in particular, there's a lot of questions. Anecdotally, it hasn't seemed like it's been that useful for people with schizophrenia or psychotic disorders.
Yeah.
And it can be kind of adding a bit of fuel to the fire there. But it hasn't been carefully studied yet. So there's kind of anecdotal evidence needs to be approached with some caution.
Yeah, especially when it's a longer term case or something. Like, it's probably easier, I would think, in a a new case, like brand new, almost like, because I know just as a, vulnerable, my younger brother, he's had it diagnosed since he was 17 and now he's about 36. So, I don't know, if it would be a smart thing. So, because he, I think, was using it when he was in his teenage years, and it did cause everyone gets, predisposed in some ways. Different than my grandma had schizophrenia too, so it runs in the family. But as far as anxiety, trauma, pain relief, PTSD, I know is really big now in the military and also in the U.S. in general, from COVID even. Mental health is at an all-time high for awareness. We should be at an awareness. I know my family is very aware of it. So coping and mindfulness and good health and exercise. Like, I'm a professional marathon runner. That's what balances me. And as well as doing daily good things for my body and soul, like meditation or eating superfoods like medicinal mushrooms in my tea or coffee. Eating healthy, making my bed, just doing those things that, get me going, win my morning, get my day going. But is there a lot of research going on right now for some of these other things like PTSD?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Let me tell you a little bit about the different things being studied, and this is probably just the tip of the iceberg. So aside from depression, PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder is one area of interest. Various substance use disorders, including alcohol use disorder, cocaine use disorder, nicotine use disorder, are also look very promising.
And so even like methamphetamine addiction, or like, what do you call some of the other ones? Like, some of the other drug endemics, or the painkillers, the painkiller epidemic with opioids.
Yeah, opiates may be of interest for psilocybin. There's actually a different psychedelic agent called Ibogaine or Iboga, which is it's a tree with a root from areas of West Africa, and that actually is shown, at least anecdotally, the most promise for treating opiate use disorder. So that's where the focus is more for the opiate use problems. But for the psilocybin, alcohol, nicotine, cocaine, I think methamphetamine, they might be looking into that as well, but I would have to double check that. There's also eating disorders are being looked at. Obsessive compulsive disorder is being looked at. Dementia is being looked at. Traumatic brain injuries are being looked at.
Concussions, football injuries, boxers. Wow.
Yeah, there's actually a company that was founded by a former NHL player who felt that psilocybin mushrooms helped him so much. He started this company to look into treating traumatic brain injury with psilocybin mushrooms.
Are they doing some type of magnetic resonance or some type of imaging to follow up on how the brain is repairing itself through the connections? Or my intuition and from reading research is that it's helping the brain open up communication channels. And it's not like a painkiller. It's not just covering up something. It's actually, how does it work? Do we understand how it works in the brain, like with the prefrontal and all the different parts of the brain?
We understand some things about how it works in the brain, but in terms of having a very complete understanding of the brain in general, much less what psychedelics are doing in the brain, my opinion is we're still very far from that. But imaging studies are commonly done. In terms of, assessing how effective these things are for outcome, imaging isn't normally the primary mode. We're really looking at how well people are functioning and feeling after the treatments. And there's various sort of scales and things like that are done to assess that.
So it's not so important right now to understand exactly how it's working. We will catch up. The science will catch up. It's more important that we're getting great results.
It's kind of from a practical standpoint. If we want to understand as much as we can in neuroscience, but
like, I'm sure there's a follow-up too, a year later, does that? So,
yeah, there's been a few long-term follow-up studies, and they want to track as many people for as long as they can to see how durable the responses are. And many people do seem to be getting durable responses for years afterwards. So that's really cool.
This is such a promising field. When you mentioned MAPS before, I think they're out of Madison, Wisconsin, where I was born, and I think because they have an office.
Out of Madison. MAPS is actually in Santa Cruz, California.
I think they have an office in Madison because I've seen it. I think they have a chapter there. But I saw the founder, I forget his last name, something like Dubin.
Doblin. Rick Doblin.
Rick Doblin, yeah, really, guys should check him out too and see what they're up to, because as Dr. Scott said, they're probably the largest nonprofit psychedelics research in the world, I would say, right? And they've been around for a long time too, like 20 to 30 years. And I think they're actually working on getting a patent that's not, well, they talked about how, I watched one of their founders' podcasts about how, drug companies are patenting some of these chemicals, and it's easier for them to fast track something than a nonprofit because they don't have the experience that drug companies do in getting through all the paperwork and all the review process. But they are, I think, and it costs a tremendous amount of money, but I think that they're very close to releasing something that is not going to be expensive drug. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, the intellectual property in the psychedelic arena in terms of that sort of commerce, there's a lot of controversy there and a lot of subtleties. Excuse me. MAPS themselves does not seem very interested in pursuing patents and in maximizing profits the way their business is structured. They have a nonprofit, and they also have a public benefits corporation, where part of the mission of a public benefits corporation can be, it's okay to not maximize profits if you are maximizing benefits to the community, versus standard for-profit companies, LLCs, and that they're beholden to their shareholders to maximize profits at ways, even if it might seem detrimental to the community, they may still have to do that. So that's where MAPS is really cool in being able to mold, the way their company works to the best, benefits of society. So a lot of people are trying to get patents and things like that. It's kind of hard to achieve a lot of those because so many of these things have been known and in the public sphere for so long.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, there's really no bad side to the argument, and I know we need to have it open and fair for the world to benefit from. I know, in full disclosure, my mom was a pharmacist for 35 years in a hospital, in the same hospital I was born in for her entire career, and I grew up going to visit her at the hospital all the time, and every week almost, and I got to be in the pharmacy a lot. And she is a retired pharmacist now, and she'd go to all the conferences and come back with all the paraphernalia. They send them back with all the pens, the calendars, all the stuff with the pharmaceutical drugs on it. I've probably taken 3 pharmaceutical drugs in my life, and it was for very serious health issues where it was a stomach disorder, or that would be, the main one I can think of, a stomach disorder. But I haven't had to take many in my life, thank God. Because I've lived an extremely healthy life, but others need it. I guess the point I was trying to say is that I look forward to seeing, psilocybin and other psychedelics and other plant medicines, like could be San Pedro, it could be ayahuasca, it could be, even bufo, or, like kambo. Like, these are things that are used for trauma, for healing the mind. With ayahuasca, it's very sacred. All these things are sacred. The mushrooms are sacred. I've actually had the chance to try ayahuasca in a ceremony 3 times in my life, and I got tremendous benefits from it, for just overall well-being, and just reigniting, passion within me and exploration and understanding who I am. So I look forward to the time when it's something that people who are more used to going to their doctor and getting a prescription, they can actually have a more holistic, or a holistic doctor could prescribe them, in a study, or with a, certified or board approved, shaman, or therapist. I'm sure you could be considered a shaman. It's all, nomenclature. You're using it in a very mindful, respectful, controlled way. You have your intentions of, pure.
I don't have a lineage of shamanism, so I'd like to be, respectful of, that sort of aspect of being a shaman.
Sure.
Although, some people might look at it as, adjacent to shamanism in some way.
Yeah.
But, this is, again, where there's just so many different lenses of looking at, psychedelic treatments, and also holistic treatments in general, like you mentioned. I'm glad you brought that up. And I'd like to take the viewpoint of being inclusive and saying there's a lot of different, sort of groups under one big tent, and we can all kind of coexist and learn from each other and feed off each other. And it's about any given individual using whatever tools they have at their disposal at that current time that feels right to them, and having those options and being able to use their own intuition as guidance, that I think is important. And yeah, in terms of the holistic, I think that, we're in terms of modern medicine is really starting to grab onto the idea a bit more of, the mind-body connection, the way the body interconnects, the gut and the brain and so many different aspects. And in terms of a full scientific understanding, we're just really, I think, at the tip of the iceberg of starting this research, but it's happening. And for psychedelic treatments in particular, we very much, certainly in the preparation, but also in the integration stage, which is after the dosing, we like to talk a lot about people looking at themselves as sort of one whole unit, and they need to, really think about their physical health, their emotional health, their mental health, and also their spiritual health. And that's another avenue that I'm particularly excited about in terms of for mental health treatment, which has been kind of around for at least a century, a little bit more in the US at least. Religious and spiritual aspects of mental health have been neglected, really, and I think it's unfortunate how neglected they've been, because I think they really are an important part of mental health. And this research is really kind of introducing the idea that that's something that might be good to start to look at and understand and include in mental health treatment. Now, it's a little bit of an iffy footing because your average psychiatrist or psychologist hasn't really had much training or understanding of spirituality, of their own spiritual practices, of helping others, kind of understand and work through, their spiritual path. And so that's another area of study that I think the psychedelics is really ushering in, spirituality, the sacred, the mystical. For some people, it might include, also religious, organized religion, religious aspects.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Ego dissolving, oftentimes, right? Is what some of the psychedelics are. They're ego dissolving sometimes, right? Is that helpful to?
Yeah. So the sense of self can be profoundly altered in a lot of different ways, and you can call that ego or yourself or whatever it is. It's really hard, I think, to describe to people who haven't had that experience themselves what that might mean, and you can use a lot of poetic and metaphorical language to understand it. But in general, there's something in the brain, and this is where we could start to include some neuroscience and maybe start to kind of paint a picture of something where there's a part of the brain called the default mode network. Mm-hmm. And that's the part of the brain that's active when you're, say, daydreaming, or when you're thinking about something in your life, or when you're worrying about the future, or you're fretting or regretting over something of the past, or just thinking about yourself. It's sort of that sense of self that comes into play. Now, the default mode network isn't always super active. There's times it goes really quiet. For instance, experienced meditators, their default mode network goes really quiet. Somebody who maybe is getting in the groove in a marathon and just their brain's kind of just really focused on what they're doing. Or a basketball player
who basically you're focused in the zone.
You're in the zone, you're in the flow. You're not really thinking about yourself. You're really present in the moment in a way that the self kind of is really I don't know about disappearing, but really going down, in terms of the presence of Brian being here or Scott being here doing this. This is just happening. This is just doing and being. And psychedelics also really quiet the default mode network, which might explain some of that loss of sense of self, of dissolving of the ego.
Nice feeling oftentimes. I mean, it's not scary to me. It feels nice,
For some people, it can be scary because
it's a oneness, right?
Yeah, for some, it can be pure bliss. The ego also sometimes, if it's not used to that happening, especially in such a powerful way as psychedelics can do, can sometimes kind of be like, oh my God, what is happening? And resist being pushed aside. So that's it can go both directions. But in general, when the sense of self goes quiet, some really interesting things can happen both in terms of in the brain. A lot of different areas of the brain are now able to connect where that sense of self is kind of blocking them and keeping them in their place. Now they're kind of like, when they do the brain scans, it's like, oh, these areas of the brain are like talking a lot more. They don't usually do that. But also in terms of just what people are experiencing subjectively, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, that's where, really interesting things can happen. The oneness, or, very non-ordinary states of consciousness, people feeling like they're experiencing something from the distant past or the future, or there's all sorts of things that can happen that can be interesting.
Work your problems a little easier, you can like work on yourself a little easier.
That too. There can be insights that pop up, breakthroughs, emotionally or mentally. We're like, oh, the light bulb just like goes on in a powerful way.
Awesome. Well, we're coming up here on the last quarter of the podcast, and I'm grateful for your time. I know you have a hard stop in about 10 minutes. We could talk for hours. I'd love to someday do a format, Joe Rogan style form podcast with you. And I'm sure you're gonna be at Art With Me. I heard the new Miami in mid-November.
Yeah, I'm excited about that, and that's thanks to you actually helping me make that connection. It looks like I'll be giving a talk there and maybe being on a panel. And yeah, the Art With Me Miami should be a really, I think, cool event for people to check out.
That's good.
I've gone to it. I've gone to it in Tulum, actually. It started in Tulum. I went in 2019, and it was really incredible. And I think they're really putting a lot of effort into making this a special event. And it's nice because it's like right before Basel, before it starts getting, I think, too crowded in Miami. It'll be down in Virginia Key, which will be a beautiful setting. So yeah, I'm excited about that. You plan on going?
Yeah, 100%. Shout out to Ashley and Ellie from Art With Me. And it's going to be November 26th through 28th in Virginia Key, as Dr. Scott said. And they're going to have a lot of people from the community. It's not only a music festival, but it's also a wellness festival. And it's an art festival. And founded
and child stuff for kids. Sorry?
I just remember that what I heard about the story, because I didn't go to the Tulum one, but I've heard a little bit about it, is that the founder of a hotel in Tulum wanted to create an environmentally friendly gathering or festival to help heal Tulum, in a nutshell, and bring people together for like in a more conscious way. Is that how it's going to Miami for its first festival? They're bringing the same ethics or ethos. They're going to have like a daytime programming that's like, I forget, it's like breathe, play, and it's something learn. They have daytime. I'll be leading a mushroom tea party, hopefully.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, medicinal mushrooms. You're going to come, put on a little hat, hopefully, and you're going to have a lot of recipes, sit at a table, have a discussion, just like in, Alice in Wonderland, right? And
it'll be the Mad Hatter.
Yeah. And maybe be
it can be Alice.
Yeah. So, but Art With Me is going to be a lot of fun. You can guys come check out Dr. Scott and myself there. I guess Dr. Scott, in this last section, because you shared so much about psychiatry and where it's going in this modern era and how it's including things now that were kind of kept out before, that were like taboo to talk about, or they were just thought of as pseudoscience, and now they're really coming into being studied in clinical studies that have like, what do you call, like peer-reviewed results, and like this is like legit science being done on mushrooms and psychedelics, which are basically mind-altering substances. Some are natural and some are synthetic, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But they all could have a use in a proper setting. Not all, maybe, but they're reviewing which ones are, and some have great therapy. I mean, they call them magic mushrooms, but we call them psilocybin. That's the active component, right, of the Psilocybin cubensis species, and it's used by cultures for thousands of years. So we're, same thing with medicinal mushrooms. Now we're catching up to how the Chinese use mushrooms for longevity and for fertility and for stress and for preventing dementia. Like you said, there's so many brain function, energetic, and health benefits. So that leads me into my next section. I want to learn a little bit about you, and also things you've learned and your patients do, or just things for your wellness. What do you do in the morning for your wellness routine? Your wellness routine?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not a slow starter in the morning, but I'm not like the get up and go jog 10 miles sort of guy either. So I usually get up, I take my dog for a walk, I play in my garden a little bit, drink some water, I like to have a cup of coffee. I do sometimes will throw Live Ultimate products like in my smoothie or my acai bowl, and really been happy with those products and the results. My wife is the one, Alicia, who got me interested in Live Ultimate. So I'm really grateful for the work you guys are doing.
Oh, the elixir, the green one?
I've used both actually, both the shrooms and the brown one and the green one. I need to stop by your office at some point soon and get more.
Got new travel size now, so these are pouches that come 30 in a box for shrooms and elixir. And we also have vitamin C formula that just came out called Ultimate C, which is 11 super berries and super fruits. This is a pure vitamin C formula. And so we're also going to have some new formulas in the future for the brain, for post-workout, for like a protein, like a plant-based protein with gut health benefiting, like superfoods. So what about your your superfoods? What type of health benefits do you look for in your foods?
I wouldn't say I have a specific kind of regimen that I follow, but I am mostly plant-based sort of foods and organic. I like to eat a lot of whole foods, cook a lot of my own food, and things along those lines. So, I don't know that I specifically, monitor the amount of superfoods I'm using, but just sort of use my own intuition in guiding me in including those sorts of foods in my diet. And my wellness routine also includes, physical activity in nature. I really like being out at the beach, walking and jogging there. Being in nature, I think, is a great part of wellness. And also really connecting with community, and I think that is a huge part of wellness. We're really meant to be social beings and to be in the presence of others and to be sharing in each other's struggles and to, share love and compassion and kindness and things like that, both with people who you know and have known for a long time, and also, creating new connections, I think, is also a very important part of my wellness routine.
That's really, really two very powerful things I think you just mentioned, because at Miami Mushroom Fest was the first time I got to meet you in person. I got introduced to you through Andrew Weingart before that, and when I met you, I was impressed by the fact that you were so down to earth with our audience and with interacting with people after the discussion and during the discussion and stopping and what you were talking about and just really reflecting on what they were saying and interacting with them throughout the whole weekend. And you were dancing out at our at our, what we call that, the shroomarium, the shroom amphitheater, the shroom stage we set up, and art with me and going to Tulum and traveling and San Francisco. It sounds like you're very well traveled, like northwestern Chicago area. That's where I'm from, Miami, all over, which is good because then you're getting out there and instead of just being buried in the laboratory all the time. And so I think that's really powerful community. And then the second thing you said, getting out in nature. There's something to be said about just going, like we live right by the ocean, and when I go to the ocean, any anxiety or stress I have instantly gets better. And if my body's aching from being sore from running 80 to 100 miles a week, just setting foot on the sand and then going in the water for 5 minutes and just soaking. But I read it online that studies have shown that even just looking at the ocean and being out in nature or being in a forest or being on a park bench or walking or taking your shoes off and on bare grass, all these things help relieve stress, but they also are shown to boost mood. I think that's really powerful. And I don't think enough people really do that, but I think that our Live Ultimate community, we're really mindful and we have a lot of really enlightened ambassadors and community members. But that's hopefully, I think, one thing people can do for free, to boost their mood. And, mushrooms are a great way. Like medicinal mushrooms are ultimate shrooms. Reishi and lion's mane and all these mushrooms are known to boost cordyceps, boost your mood.
Yes.
They don't quite know how yet. It's kind of like esoteric, like a chi-like mood. It just boosts without caffeine. There's a synergy with caffeine, but without caffeine, it gives you a burst of wellness, of vitality. Sometimes people don't like it when I say vitality. I caught some hell for saying that in the last couple of weeks because that's too vague. That's what all the companies say. And it's just like, well, vitality just means strength. It just means vigor, It's the same thing as tonifying. Basically, when you're taking the mushrooms or superfoods, you should get a flush of well-being they're a good source, and they're like maca. Maca gives you energy. Ginseng, you know, ginger, turmeric, all these things, wheatgrass. When you take these things, you're going to feel a burst of wellness. So, and mood. And when you feel good, your mood improves. So, you know, I think sometimes when people are like not feeling good, if they do something like take a superfood, I think, or go outside in nature, or go, you know, have a talk with someone, they might feel better, quicker.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I agree 100%. And other elements of wellness for me are like good music, and like really like delving into that, and, you know, really experiencing music fully.
I love music.
You know,
Do you
spending
play
time with my
music?
dog.
More of a listener, or do you play music?
You know, I didn't really grow up in a musical household, so I'm not really, you know, that adept at musical instruments. I played kind of guitar on my own for a while. I listen to a lot of music. I also play around with like a DJ controller and mixing music. So, yeah, I know. DJ Brian the botanist. So yeah, I'm definitely new to that aspect of it, but I love it. You know, just really love to play
questions.
music.
Let me know. I had to pick a lot of people's brains to get even the 1% of knowledge I have with music. I think the interesting thing is you're always learning, and I think the same thing with health. You're always learning. You never know everything. And the same thing could be said for psychiatry, right? Always learning.
Yeah, totally. You better be.
Yeah, girlfriend's. I like my girlfriend's Instagram. She was trying to change it. I said, "Babe, don't change it. Paula.healthevolution, because everything we do in life should be an evolution, right? It should be growth.
Yeah. Constant change.
Not just thinking, and that's what happens in like some institutions. They get kind of, too focused on just one way instead of being minded. Well, the topics today were really amazing to cover with you, Dr. Scott. I know you're coming up on a hard stop here. You've got a lot of clients and other research you're doing. Is there any last messages you'd like to share with our audience before we sign off?
No, I just really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation with you, Brian, and to speak to the Live Ultimate community on the range of topics. And I look forward to hopefully doing it again, and hopefully there'll be another Miami Mushroom Festival coming up in the next year or so, and we'll see some people at art with me. I'll definitely be checking out your tea party, and I look forward to that.
Awesome. Yeah, we're hoping to do Miami Mushroom Fest in the next 6 months. We just talked about the other day, and we might wait till March or April. We wanted to do it in January, but it could compete with Love Burn, which one of our founding members is a founding member of that one. And Love Burn is in January in Virginia.
I'll be there. That's actually in mid-February.
Mid-February? Yeah. We didn't want to get close to it, but we might do it in January, otherwise March or April for sure. And we would love to have you come back, and I'll definitely have you come back on in the next year when you're ready. And everyone, please send Dr. Scott Fisher a follow on Instagram, because he is doing some really cool research, and I personally am always excited to see what he's sharing. And he's oftentimes a great reminder too on the holistic ways to improve your health mentally, which I think everyone needs to be aware of, whether or not you have it in your family or not. Everyone needs to be aware of mental health and how important it is for our society, and not to stigmatize it, as something bad. It's something we can, be aware of, support each other, be open about, have an open conversation about this today even. No
one has perfect mental or emotional health, so we all have our opportunities to allow healing and work there.
That's a great point. Everyone, is working on their mental health, not just people clinically diagnosed. So amazing, Dr. Scott. Thank you so much for your experience and your work. We all appreciate it a lot, and we'll stay in touch, and we'll see you at Art With Me in late November in Key Biscayne, and future Miami Mushroom Fest. And guys, send him a follow, Dr. Scott Fisher on Instagram. Thanks again, Dr. Scott.
Thank you, Brian. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Be well.
You too. Bye.
Ultimate.